Hey everyone, it's Bradley Berger. I just wanted to add a little thing here to say that if you notice a large drop off in quality from the last episode, that's because this episode was created first and I did not have much of the knowledge I had when I created the first episode, when I created this one, as is my first time ever making a proper YouTube video. So please cut me some slack. Alright, enjoy the video. Hello everybody, welcome back to Simulation Sunday. I'm your host, Mr. Bradley Berger, and today I'll be covering the very first competitive presidential election in U.S. history, the election of 1796. We'll be imagining how this election would play out if it happened today, using a modern 2022 to 2032 electoral map. Alright, so before we begin, I'm just gonna, in case you didn't see the last episode, here are the rules. You can pause right here if you want to read them in full. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's introduce our candidates. Alright, so first up we have John Adams, representing the Federalist Party. Adams, a Massachusetts man like myself, stood for a strong central government, a national bank, a robust industrial economy, and protective tariffs to support American manufacturing. Adams was supported by many of the wealthy people of the day, who believed he could bring stability to American life, as well as enriching themselves. This sentiment of stability continues on into the modern day, appealing to many upper-middle-class and upper-class people, particularly white people, whose lives are already pretty stable, and they support candidates which could potentially keep that status quo. On the other hand, we have Thomas Jefferson of the Democratic-Republican Party. Jefferson was a champion of small government, states' rights, not the modern dog whistle, literal states' rights, civil liberties, and populism. Despite being a wealthy plantation owner, he stylized himself as the common man's candidate, emphasizing agrarian values and suspicion of centralized power. Sound familiar? Anyway, with all that context out of the way, let's begin with the safe states. Alright, so, our safe states for Adams will be New Jersey, due to its high numbers of white, suburban, educated, and wealthy people. Same goes for Delaware. Utah, a lot of white, educated, wealthy, and suburban people, but they do tend to vote heavily Republican due to the Mormonism in the state. Mormonism is a very order and authority-focused culture, so although it definitely is a little bit of a wild card, this state would definitely end up breaking heavily for Adams if this happened in the modern day. I also pick Hawaii as a safe state. Hawaii has large numbers of white educated people, not white educated, wealthy educated people who, although there's less white voters, I do believe that there would be enough people in the state to swing it towards a safe Adams victory. Alright, so now are the safe Jefferson states. There are a lot here, so bear with me for a minute. We got Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska District 3, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, and Maine District 2. What do all these have in common? These are all dominated by rural, agrarian, poor/working class white voters, the exact coalition that Jefferson was made to gather the votes of. These voters tend to promote small government, self-reliance, and a more populist approach, fitting Jefferson's message perfectly. Many of the states also have strong traditions of populism, resisting the concentrated power and elitism associated with Adams' political philosophy. Alright, now let's move on to the likely states. Alright, so for our likely Adams states, we will have Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Maryland. These three states have large populations of affluent, educated, and socially liberal voters who would generally align with Adams. However, a growing populist undercurrent, particularly among younger voters and rural residents, keeps them from being completely safe. Even despite Massachusetts being John Adams' home state, I still believe that he would only take it with a likely margin due to the new populist movement among progressives in the United States. Alright, now for the likely Jefferson states. There are a lot of these again. So, we got Nevada, Colorado, Texas, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Vermont, Nebraska at large, Maine at large, and New Hampshire. So these Midwest and rural New England states fit well into Jefferson's coalition, so these areas are dominated by working class and agrarian voters who would likely resonate with his anti-elitist small government message. Even though all of these states, like Iowa, tends to vote Republican, West Virginia is the most Republican state in the nation, Vermont is the most Democratic state in the nation, they all have the idea of a mostly agrarian populace in common, with people like Bernie Sanders originating from Vermont, or the new Democratic candidate Nathan Sage from Iowa, working class people who are definitely populist by every definition of the word. That being said, particularly in the Midwest here, there's a lot of voters that would end up voting for Adams due to his want for a return to industry in America, which would, I believe, sway some voters to his side, although not by nearly enough to change the results of this, leaving him with a likely margin. For Nevada and Colorado, and New Hampshire a little bit as well, it comes down to their libertarian attitudes towards things. These states are all known for having very libertarian attitudes towards things like drugs. New Hampshire, to wearing seatbelts, which is really stupid, but whatever. Sex work, stuff like that. And for Texas, I believe it's just a combination of the rural populist younger voters, and there's just so many rural voters in Texas that they're just enough to completely shift the state towards Jefferson despite opposition in urban areas. Alright, that wraps it up for the likely and safe states. Real quick, I just want to take a look at the election itself. So, currently, John Adams is sitting at a measly 55 electoral votes. If you look at this map, Kamala Harris, who lost pretty badly in the 2024 election, had 211 electoral votes at this point in time. And the last candidate to have such little electoral votes at this point in the election was Michael Dukakis in 1988, who lost the election in a landslide to George H.W. Bush. So, yeah, he's losing pretty badly. Jefferson, meanwhile, has an incredible coalition right now of all of these different states throughout the country, mostly dominated by rural, agrarian, and libertarian voters. Anyway, now let's move on to the lean and tilt states in the country. These states are the real battlegrounds. This is what will decide the election for our candidates. So, let's have a look. For Lean Adams, I believe the states will be California, New York, Rhode Island, D.C., Maine District 1, and Washington State. This was a big victory for Adams, but these are a lot more interesting than it may first seem. So, Maine District 1, D.C., and Rhode Island are urban areas with diverse populations, where progressive voters dominate. With progressive voters, it's a very tricky split because Jefferson's support for individual liberties and civil rights would definitely pull in a lot of progressives, but overall, most mainstream progressives in the United States lean towards a larger central government in order to enforce progressive values, which John Adams would better represent. Just with pure speculation, I'd call this around a 52-48 lean in Adams' favor, which would translate to a lean in these three areas. And then for California, Washington, and New York, the story is more about their economic landscapes. California and Washington are powered by tech industries, forgive the pun, no pun intended, which are massive and have heavy control over the state, and this is enough to tilt these states towards Adams. New York, meanwhile, is obviously anchored by New York City, the biggest city in the nation, which is also the financial hub of the nation, and New York also contains many urban hubs throughout the state, which would end up leaning it towards Adams in the end. Overall, these states are definitely solidly in the Adams column, but not by massive margins. Alright, and for Jefferson's lean states, we have New Mexico, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So first I want to talk about the Midwest trio of Minnesota, Illinois, and Indiana. All three of these states are dominated by blue-collar, working-class voter base, which definitely leans populist, especially outside the major metro areas, although people in these areas would definitely be a bit more sympathetic towards the populist cause and would likely not be able to swing the state by enough in order to swing it back towards Adams, like what they do for Democrats in modern day elections. For the southern states of Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, and Virginia, these are all quite interesting, as many of these states have young progressives, southern farmers, and minority communities. But while Adams may appeal to some suburban voters, particularly in Fairfax County, Virginia, the Atlanta suburbs here, and older voters in Florida, Jefferson's anti-elitist populist rhetoric would definitely resonate more with these groups, particularly among minority voters who often feel like they're being bucked by the current administration. So these states would definitely end up voting for Jefferson in the end. For New Mexico, it just comes down to the large Latino population, which would definitely be open to Jefferson's anti-establishment messaging, especially given the current state of deportations in this country. And, excuse me, I forgot Oregon earlier. For Oregon, it has to do with its strong libertarian streak, a lot like these other states when it comes to drugs and sex work and things that are kind of sort of morally dubious. Oregon has always been like this and is definitely more apt to support a more libertarian candidate instead of a more establishment candidate like John Adams. So, those are the lean states. Now, let's move on to the tilt states. Alright, so, although the election's pretty much been decided, it's time for the real nail-biters, the tilt states. These are the true battlegrounds, where the margins are razor thin. First, for our tilts for Adams, we have Nebraska District 1 and Arizona. So, Nebraska District 1. This district includes Lincoln, Nebraska, and the suburbs around Omaha. There are two key groups in this district: suburban conservatives who prefer a more centralized government, and rural populists who lean more anti-establishment. Historically, Nebraska has had a streak of populism, like William Jennings Bryan, who ran there as a progressive and lost, but was extremely popular in the state. But the suburban influence of this area would give Adams a slight, extremely slight, maybe 0.1, 0.2% margin of victory here. For Arizona, it is a pure toss-up. This state has a near-even split of suburban whites, white farmers, young progressives, minorities. They have it all. However, in recent times, suburban voters who are definitely more inclined to support stable and centralized government would just barely tip the state in Adams' favor, but this is a knife-edge call. Alright, and for the tilts for Jefferson, we have Nebraska District 2 and Pennsylvania. Alright, we're almost there. Nebraska District 2, covering Omaha, is an urban area with a mix of progressives, blue-collar workers, and minorities. Progressives may barely lean Adams, but Jefferson's populist appeal to working-class voters would probably be enough to swing the city just barely back into the Jefferson column, although this area does have a probability of voting for Jefferson by more. This is a little bit of a wild card call, but I do believe that progressives in the city of Omaha would be able to swing the state towards Adams. And then, finally, Pennsylvania, the ultimate swing state. This state has everything: urban areas, wealthy suburbs, and vast swaths of rural farmland and working-class small towns. This is the place where elections are won and lost. But given the populist streak of the state over the recent times, I think Jefferson has just the slightest of edges here but it would definitely be a nail biter. So, in this alternate 1796 scenario, with modern voting patterns in play, Jefferson would emerge victorious with 369 electoral votes to Adams's 169. It's a fascinating showcase of how much the American electorate has shifted, yet not really shifted in some ways. So, if you noticed, most of the voting breakdown here was based on class. Poor people and working class people tended to vote for Jefferson. Wealthier people tended to vote for Adams. And this was true even back then. If one were to look at the old election map in 1796, one would see that states in the South, mostly dominated by poor white farmers, tended to vote for Jefferson, whereas states in the North, often dominated by wealthy factory owners, voted for Adams, because Adams wanted more industry, and Jefferson supported the average man, the farmer. So it truly shows how much we've changed as a nation, especially when you look at the 2024 election and you see how many other factors were at play. Things like religion and social issues and abortion and same-sex marriage and trans rights and immigration, all these things that just didn't matter back then. The Constitution was still being made at the time, and both of these people were highly influential in its creation, especially Jefferson, who in the modern day is well known for writing the Bill of Rights, the reason why we have protections such as freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, right to an attorney, right to not incriminate oneself, due process, so many of these things. And without these people, we would not have it. So, in the end, thank you for embarking on this exercise with me. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please drop a like. Please subscribe, as this is a brand new channel and there's no other way you can show support. And please stick around for more deep dives into the wild world of American elections. This has been Bradley Berger, and you've been watching Berger Elections. Have a political day.